The morning over Tula was shrouded in thick, icy mist. The smokestacks of the great machine building plant belched steady columns of steam into the pale sky. Deep inside the vast factory, the rhythm of hammers, presses, and conveyors blended into one metallic heartbeat. Every clang of steel seemed to echo across the enormous hangar, a pulse of industrial might. Engineer Sergei Platonov stood beside the assembly line for the new FAB 500 M62 aerial bombs. Sparks from welding torches reflected in his safety glasses, painting his face in flickers of orange. His posture was straight, his expression tense. A man who understood the weight of what his hands helped create. "Power on the second line," he said quietly but firmly. "Power up, Sergei Andreevich," replied a young technician, flipping the heavy switch. The conveyor belts began to move, carrying cylindrical bomb casings, smooth and gleaming, under the arms of robotic cranes. Each shell was carefully lowered into position, filled, sealed, and weighed. Technicians in thick gloves and visors monitored every movement. It wasn't just a job. It was a ritual. Behind every piece of metal lay months of design, calculation, and sleepless nights. The roar of machines was the anthem of an entire nation, preparing for what it saw as its survival. Through the factory windows, the dim winter light filtered in, touching the silver forms of the completed weapons. Rows of them stood like silent giants waiting for their journey. The chief engineer entered the floor, clipboard in hand. "First batch ready for Voronezh Air Base tonight," he said in a low tone. Sergei gave a slow nod. He didn't smile. He rarely did these days. The factory had become his world, his duty, and his burden. When the siren signaled the end of the shift, most workers didn't rush home. Many stayed behind to check the next line, polish the final details. They knew their work mattered. It would echo far beyond the walls of Tula. As Sergei walked through the plant one last time, he placed a gloved hand on the cold surface of one. "Completed, Fabi. You'll fly soon," he murmured, not with pride, but with solemn respect. Outside, snowflakes began to fall, covering the railway cars that waited to carry their heavy cargo south. Russia's night was calm, but beneath that calm, its engines of war hummed tireless and certain. A sharp wind swept across the Voronezh Air Base, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and cold iron. Floodlights sliced through the fog, illuminating the sleek silhouettes of Su-34 bombers lined up on the tarmac. Their steel-gray fuselages gleamed faintly under the night sky, each armed with the newly fitted ФАБы M62 bombs beneath their wings. Inside the command post, a low, tense hum filled the air. Computer screens glowed with maps of Ukraine's western regions, lines, grids, and pulsing red markers showing target coordinates. The smell of coffee and ozone mixed with the faint metallic scent from the hangars. Colonel Alexei Gorin stood before the main operations board, his hands clasped behind his back. The light from the monitors cast hard shadows across his face, revealing deep lines carved by years of service. He spoke in a calm, clipped tone. "Targets confirmed. Industrial zone near Dnepre. Storage depots in Ivano-Frankivsk. Satellite recon verified at ZO 400. The corridor is clear." "Copy that," replied the intelligence officer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The holographic display flickered, updating real-time wind conditions and radar coverage. Outside, mechanics moved like clockwork, checking hydraulic systems, fueling tanks, adjusting navigation units. Every motion was deliberate. No one spoke unless necessary. The silence was heavier than the roar of engines soon to come. One of the younger pilots, Lieutenant Makarov, stood by his aircraft, helmet under his arm. He stared at the open night sky, then at the glowing bombs beneath the wings. "They look almost peaceful," he said softly. His commander, Major Tregubov, answered without looking at him. "They're not meant to be beautiful, Makarov. They're meant to work." Back inside, Colonel Gorin checked his watch. 23:47. He pressed the radio switch. "Eagle 1 through Eagle 6, prepare for departure. Altitude 8,000, heading vector 252, execute on signal." Outside, engines ignited one after another, sending waves of sound rumbling across the frozen ground. The roar was so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. Through the reinforced glass, Gorin watched the first Su-34 accelerate down the runway, fire blooming from its exhaust. It lifted into the dark, banking westward until it became a single blinking light in the endless sky. He exhaled slowly. "Godspeed, boys," he murmured almost inaudibly. Behind him, the map screens pulsed red. Dnipro, Ivano-Frankivsk, waiting for the storm that was already on its way. In the heart of Moscow, deep beneath the gray monolith of the National Defense Control Center, the atmosphere was dense with electricity and quiet precision. Giant digital screens filled the wall of the operations hall, projecting satellite images, flight trajectories, and coded messages from across the Western Front. Every movement of a plane, every signal in the sky was tracked and analyzed in real time. General Colonel Viktor Lavrentiev stood before the central console. He was a tall, broad man in his late 50s, his uniform immaculate, his face calm but stern. Behind the measured look in his eyes lived decades of service. Chechnya, Syria, and now the new theater of conflict. To him, war was no longer chaos. It was logistics, mathematics, timing. Status of the Voronezh group? He asked evenly. Confirmed strike path. All 6 Su-34s maintaining altitude 8,000. Guidance modules locked. Estimated target acquisition in 7 minutes, reported Major Krylov. Scanning multiple monitors. A low hum of processors filled the hall, mingled with the faint tapping of keyboards. Dozens of officers in dark uniforms moved around, speaking in short, coded bursts. The tension wasn't loud, it was focused, compressed, almost sacred. Then the first report came in. Eagle 1 payload release confirmed. Eagle 2. Eagle 3, all ordnance away, Krylov announced. Lavrentiev's eyes narrowed on the monitor showing Dnipro. The map blinked once, then displayed a brief, blinding flash captured by orbital surveillance. Seconds later, a second flare appeared over Ivano-Frankivsk. Impact confirmed, the duty officer said. Both targets neutralized. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of machines seemed louder, sharper. Lavrentiev nodded slowly. He did not smile, did not celebrate. To him, this was another tick in an endless ledger of cause and consequence. Maintain post-strike monitoring. Task MCHS to prepare situational assessment. Civil channels stay sealed, he ordered calmly. The general turned to the window. Outside, Moscow was just waking. Trams rattling. Snow falling silently onto the embankment. Lights flickering on in distant apartment blocks. The world above had no idea what had just unfolded beneath it. Lavrentiev took a sip of his now cold tea. His voice was barely audible. Another night's work for history to judge. The screens kept blinking, indifferent and bright. In their cold light, the machinery of war turned endlessly. Efficient, unfeeling, and very much alive. Snow was falling quietly over Yaroslavl, the flakes drifting down through the orange glow of the streetlights. Inside a small wooden house at the edge of town, warmth flickered from an old stove. The kettle hissed softly and the faint crackle of a radio filled the kitchen. The Ministry of Defense reports. High-precision strikes were carried out on military, infrastructure in the Dnipro and Ivano-Frankivsk regions. The announcer's calm, practiced voice echoed through the room. At the table sat Varvara Ivanovna, a woman in her late 70s with silver hair tied in a bun. Her gnarled hands rested on a cup of steaming tea. Across from her, her 12-year-old grandson Danya was hunched over a geography book, tracing lines across the map of Eastern Europe with his finger. Baba, look, and here's Dnipro. That's far from us, right? He asked, tilting his head. Yes, far, my dear. Far enough, Varvara answered softly, though her eyes lingered on the small dot on the map. Outside, the wind howled briefly, rattling the window panes. The old woman rose, checked the latch, then returned to the table. The world beyond her home felt vast and uncertain, but inside, it was still familiar. On the shelf above the stove stood a faded photograph. A young man in a pilot's uniform, smiling beside a MiG-21, Sergei Ivanov. Varvara's husband had flown long before Danya was born. She touched the frame with a quiet reverence. Danya followed her gaze. That's Dedushka, right? Mama said he was a hero. He was, she whispered. He flew when it was harder, when the sky itself was different. The boy closed his book, thoughtful. I want to fly too, like him. Maybe even in one of those big Su planes we see on TV. Varvara smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. Just promise me one thing, Danya. Fly to protect, not to destroy. The sky should belong to those who bring peace. He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. The stove crackled. The news on the radio faded into a slow instrumental tune. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the fences, the roads, the roofs, soft, pure, endless. The old woman looked out at the white silence and murmured a short prayer. Not for victory, but for calm. In that quiet moment, Russia felt vast, weary and enduring, an ancient land watching history repeat itself once again beneath its frozen skies.